this one's kind of out of left field, but the Tennessee Titans seem to be tearing it down. Jeffery Simmons was their first-round pick defensive tackle 4 years ago. Excellent player, but it seems like they're going to do to him what the Niners did to DeForest Buckner, which is trade him right before they give him an extension, because they don't want to give him an extension because he's probably going to get $20+ million a year because he's really good. Should the Niners trade for him and give him that extension?
Man, I don't know what the Niners have to trade for him other than Trey Lance and Javon Kinlaw. And I don't think that would be enough. I think you'd have to trade a number one. I don't think you have to trade a number one and Trey, but I'm just saying you'd have to trade a number one. I mean, it looks like Tennessee is trying to do the move that they did last year. Last year they had AJ Brown. They could have paid him. They didn't want to pay him. They traded him, and they got a pick, and they used it on Treylon Burks, and they essentially replaced him, but they downgraded. I think that the 49ers, when John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan took over the team, Grant, they really wanted to make defensive line their identity. We want a dominant defensive line that everything kind of like our dominance on the defensive line leads to everything else. That's where we want to build our team. Well, if they still believe that philosophy, I don't see how they wouldn't be interested in Jeffery Simmons. Jeffery Simmons is a monster. If you didn't catch him this year, he wears 98. He's as good a defensive tackle outside of Chris Jones as there is. And, he commands a double team. And as Armstead gets older, he's not quite the same player. You don't have a tag team guy inside with him. You got a bunch of edge guys in this draft, but it's really hard. It's going to be really hard to find a D tackle. I absolutely would be calling Ran Carthon and saying, Ran, what are we talking about here? What's the trade? What's the deal? And I would try to figure out a way to get Jeffery Simmons. I think if you could put Jeffery Simmons and Bosa and Armstead on one line, that would just be incredible. And then maybe you could get by with some younger DBs or, some younger guys in the secondary if you're going to spend your money up front. So I'd be all about Jeffery Simmons. There aren't that many tackles that are awesome against the run and still have to be combo blocked, in the pass game. He's one of them.
True.
So he's dominating. And if they still believe that, then I think they ought to go in that direction. I like that idea.
If they could afford him, I think that'd be great, but I don't think they can afford him. I don't think any team can pay Bosa $35 million a year and Armstead $25 million a year and Simmons $28 million a year. It'd be nice, but this is again why you got to be careful with the extensions you give out. Eric Armstead, good player, but man, you'd rather be given that money. You'd rather have Jeffery Simmons. And I think this kind of precludes them from getting him, which is too bad. Again, it'd be great to have all three of them. Imagine that in real life or in Madden. It would be devastating. But, man, that's a lot of money to tie up with three players. I don't think they'll do it. I think Parag Marate probably would put his foot down and say, you know what? We're not spending more than 22% of our salary cap space in the D-line. 22%! That's probably what he would say.
Well, look at Philly, though. They had Fletcher Cox, and then while they had Fletcher Cox, they went out and got Javon Hargrave. So, it was like they could have easily said, hey, man, we got Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. We got all these guys. We're pretty set. Instead, they're like, no, bring us Javon Hargrave. And they almost won the bowl. So, I don't know. Simmons
the Niners could backload the contract so that it becomes expensive after Armstead leaves. They could do something creative like that. They really could.
I'll say this. You got to decide what's more important. Is Jesse Bates more important? Or I think they've got one big swing in them in either the free agency or trade market. Maybe it's for Jesse Bates on the back end. Maybe it's for Jeffery Simmons up front. But just looking at the draft, I know there's a lot of D tackles, but there's not a lot of Jeffery Simmons.
Well, you would have to get Jeffery Simmons to agree to a backloaded contract. You would have to trade next year's first-round pick and maybe Trey Lance as well. You'd have to get him to agree to a backloaded contract, and which would mean probably like a 5 or 6 year deal. Buckner didn't want that. Buckner wanted a front-loaded contract. I think that was part of the problem with him and the 49ers. I can see it. It makes sense. Imagine him and Bosa. Forget Armstead. Imagine Simmons and Bosa on the same D-line. That'd be as good a 1-2 as any defense in the league, really.
What would you do it if Rand came to you and said, I'll give you Simmons for next year's 1 Trey, and Kinlaw. Making that deal? I mean,
No,
you're probably gonna have to
no,
do something with Kinlaw if you made this deal.
no. It's a good question. I would rather actually invest and focus this offseason on offensive line. That's where I'm coming from. But if you're gonna go D line, this is the guy to go. I think it's very, very clever. But I wouldn't do it. No, I would go splurge on a right tackle. I feel like you gotta get upgrades at right tackle and center. But what I want to ask you is, if you don't go the Jeffery Simmons route, were there any defensive tackles that piqued your interest in the combine? You know, someone that might be able to start next to Armstead if Javon Kinlaw can't do it.
Yeah, I mean there was a few. Zach Pickens is one of my favorites from South Carolina. He's probably going to be there in the third round. He's 6'4", 295. He moves incredibly well. Loved him. He
295.
What's that?
295. Do we need someone who's 320 to replace DJ Jones, or can they get by with two? I mean, Javon Kinlaw's 295, right?
Yeah, I mean he's more of a pass rusher inside. I mean,
Okay.
Siaki Ika from Baylor is 335.
Okay.
Mozzie Smith is the guy that I think they're probably staring at from Michigan. He's 6'3", 325. He did 22 reps of 325, not 225, 325. So he's
Who benches
crazy
325?
strong.
They was just like put more on.
I mean, on campus, Mozzie Smith did
okay,
325. But
I can do that.
There's yeah, seriously. Kalijah Cansey is unbelievable. But he's more of a rusher. Jalen Redmond, I thought, had a great workout from Oklahoma. He's really interesting. They met with Dante Stills from West Virginia, but he's about 285. I like the Notre Dame. There's two guys I really love. Jason Adamialola from Notre Dame, but he's 6'3", 285. He's much more like a Kevin Givens. And then the other guy I really love as well is Dawan Johnson from Toledo. He played with Sammy Womack last year. He's also 6'3", 280 in that range, but they're interior pass rushers. So, you might want to go for like, if by chance you like those guys in the draft, maybe you sign a guy like Colin Saunders from the Chiefs, somebody like that, or maybe you re-sign Ridgeway and then you go for a couple of these interior rushers. But they need both. They need that two gapper to keep the bodies off of their smallish linebackers, and then they also need some pass rush, whether it be from Givens or whoever else they're going to have in the interior.
I think the run defense might be even more important, because the way I look at it is the Niners kind of wrote off that entire NFC Championship game, but their defense they lost their quarterback, but their defense gave up 31 points, and they really got manhandled by the Eagles' offensive line, from Mailata to Dickerson to Kelsey. Like, they were just gouging the Niners' defense. Kelsey is great. They're always going to have that strength up the middle in Philly. The Niners have to be able to match up with that, and they have the same thing in Kansas City with Creed Humphrey and Joe Tooney. So the Niners really need someone who could stand up to these really elite interior offensive linemen.
Yeah, Poona Ford would be a good free agent.
He'd be phenomenal. He's good.
Poona's 5'11", but
is he really?
Yeah, he's 5'11", 310.
Wow.
That
fits. That's DJ Jones. That's DJ Jones. That works.